As our story begins, a steamship arrives in London after a long voyage from Athens, Greece. Upon disembarkation, a young man of Grecian descent is met by an English gentleman who introduces himself as Latimer. But unable to speak the language, the newcomer, Mr. Cratides, unwittingly follows his mysterious guide, only to be bludgeoned and thrown unconscious into the back of a cab, kidnapped by Mr. Latimer and his evil, laughing companion. And so begins the adventure of the Greek interpreter. At 221B, Dr. Watson is surprised to learn something new about his enigmatic friend.
During my long and intimate acquaintance with Sherlock Holmes, I'd never heard him referred to his relations, and hardly ever to his own early life. Because of this reticence, I sometimes found myself regarding him as an isolated phenomenon, as deficient in human sympathy as he was preeminent in intelligence. I'd come to believe that he was an orphan with no relatives living. But one day, to my very great surprise, he began to talk to me about his family.
My singular gift for observation and deduction may have come from my grandmother, who was a sister of Vernet, the French artist. Your art in the blood is liable to take the strangest forms. For example, my brother Mycroft.
Your brother? I didn't know you had a brother.
Oh, yes. And I can assure you that he possesses a far greater faculty for observation and deduction than I do.
Holmes, I know that you are a modest man.
My dear Watson, I cannot agree with those that rank modesty among the virtues. To the logician, everything should be seen exactly as it is. And to underestimate oneself is as much a departure from the truth as to exaggerate one's own ability. What I have just told you about my brother is the exact and literal truth.
Well, naturally, I don't doubt your word. But if there is another man in England with such singular powers, how is it that neither the police nor the public have ever heard of him, let alone myself?
He is very well known in his own circles.
Where then?
The Diogenes Club. It is the oddest club in London, and my brother one of the oddest men.
By this point in the production of the series, the crew had become more comfortable with Jeremy Brett's insistence on certain canonic fidelity. But it wasn't always that way. As he recalled to Nicholas Udichin of the Sherlock Holmes Journal, Brett said, "I think that they were very nervous to start with, because I have a feeling that the character of Holmes is very powerful, and I think that an actor can get too obsessed with what he's doing. But with so much minutia around, it seemed crazy not to explore it. Very gradually, my producer, Michael Cox, began to realize that what I was trying to do was to get it right, and to do as delicately as I could what I felt was important from the stories. On several occasions, I have been allowed to bring little bits of my favorite bits of Doyle in. In The Greek Interpreter, I was allowed to bring back the speech about modesty not being ranked as one of the virtues, which I think is a lovely little moment. That is the logician, who sees everything exactly as it is. To underestimate oneself is as big a mistake as it is to exaggerate one's own abilities. It's that kind of exactness, anything that brings color, anything that shows more about the man, not just the brilliance, but the vulnerability and the human being that is inside him. Lonely, brilliant. I'm only just over halfway in this particular series of 13 films, but it's an immense treasure hunt. To Watson, Holmes goes on to state that his brother Mycroft has come across a problem, which he believes might be of interest to his younger sibling. So together, they make their way to Pall Mall and the secretive Diogenes Club of London. But as they enter the stately building, Dr. Watson becomes apprehensive.
But what are the qualifications for the Diogenes Club?
Shyness and misanthropy. My brother is one of the founder members. It contains the most unsociable and unclubbable men in town who speak not a word and shun even the merest glance. Now let us enter.
Yes, but
Not a word.
Inside, the duo silently make their way through the strange, quiet conclave of dignitaries and regal gentlemen. Once they reach the special area known as the Stranger's Room, Holmes advises his friend that they are safe to converse aloud. But before they can speak, a stout man, perched upon a small ladder, waves them into the room, all the while watching the pedestrians below from the comfort of his lofty bow window. The man is Mycroft Holmes, and Dr. Watson gazes upon him with newfound wonder.
Look at those two men, Sherlock. What do you make of them?
The billiard marker and the other.
Precisely. What do you make of the other?
An old soldier, I perceive.
And very recently discharged.
Served in India, I see.
And a non-commissioned officer.
Royal Artillery, I fancy.
And a widower.
With a child.
Children, my dear boy. Children. Mycroft Holmes. Glad to meet you, Dr. Watson. I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
well, thank you.
For anyone who wishes to study mankind, this is the spot.
But surely you were taking things a little too far just now.
It is not hard to say, Watson, that a man of that bearing and expression of authority and sun-baked skin as a soldier is more than a private and is not long from India.
That is not long since left the service is shown by his still wearing his ammunition boots, as they call them.
He has not the cavalry stride. Yet he wore his hat on one side, as is shown by the lighter skin on one side of his brow. His weight is against him being a sapper. He is in the artillery.
Then, of course, his complete mourning shows that he's lost someone very dear. The fact that he's doing his own shopping looks as though it was his wife. He's been buying things for children, you see. There is a rattle, which shows that one of them is very, very young. The fact that he has a picture book under his arm shows there is another child. Ah, Mr. Melas.
In his book, A Study in Celluloid, Michael Cox reflected back on the Greek interpreter. He wrote, "Here again is a story with a slightly disappointing ending, but it is irresistible because it introduces us to Holmes's brother, Mycroft. It was great fun to recreate at Tatton Hall in Cheshire Mycroft's haven for the most unsociable and unclubbable men in town, with its slippered servants and air of total silence where no member is permitted to take the least notice of any other one, if only it existed in real life." In the Stranger's Room, Watson is given another lesson in observation as the brothers take up positions at the window overlooking St. James Park and compete with each other in deducing the circumstances of the passers-by. David Burke's expression of admiration and amusement at this performance is one of the delights of the scene. When Mr. Melas, the interpreter of the title, arrives to be introduced to Holmes, there is a beautifully staged moment as Holmes emerges from behind the bulk of his brother. It seems to mirror the way in which the detective gained recognition in spite of the great achievements of the older sibling. In Bending the Willow, David Stewart Davies reports that it was actually Jeremy Brett who devised this clever shot, quote, giving the impression of the younger sibling escaping from his big brother's shadow. Upon leaving the window, they are joined by one Mr. Melas, who has come to Mycroft Holmes seeking help. Once introductions are complete, Melas begins to tell his story.
For many years, I have been the chief Greek interpreter in London. I do not think that the police believe my story. On my word, I do not. Just because they have never heard of it before, they think that such a thing cannot be. But I know that I shall never be easy in my mind until I know what has become of my poor man with a sticking plaster upon his face. All this happened only 2 days ago, on Monday night. I am Greek by extraction and earn my living as an interpreter. It often happens that I am sent for at strange hours by foreigners who get into difficulties or by travelers who arrive late and wish my services.
Mr. Melas explains that Monday night he was roused late by a stranger, urgently requesting the services of an interpreter. The man introduced himself as a Mr. Latimer, and Mr. Melas accepted the commission. However, upon entering Latimer's carriage, the blinds were drawn, and Mr. Melas was informed that he would not be allowed to know their destination, for fear that he could identify it at a later date. Uneasy, but assured that he would be compensated handsomely, Melas submitted and continued the 2-hour journey. Upon their arrival, they were met by another gentleman, a small man, bespectacled and mean-spirited.
Is this Mr. Melas, Harold?
Yes.
Well done. Well done. No ill will, Mr. Melas, I trust. But we could not get on without you. If you deal fair with us, you'll not regret it. But if you try any tricks, God help you.
What do you want of me?
Only to ask a few questions of a Greek gentleman who is visiting us, and to let us have the answers. But you say no more than you are told, or it were better you had never been born.
Mr. Melas, pray continue.
Well then, this man, this evil man, showed me into a room which appeared to be very curiously furnished. But again, the only light was afforded by a single lamp half turned down.
Mr. Melas became thrilled with horror when a beaten man was brought before him, the man's face grotesquely crisscrossed with sticking plaster, his mouth effectively gagged. Upon forcing the man to sit, his captors instructed Mr. Melas that he would relay their questions, and the prisoner would write his answers on a small slate chalkboard, which would be translated aloud. They began by asking him to sign a paper, and then they asked again and again.
And so it went on. Again and again I had to ask him whether he would give in and sign the document. Again and again I had the same indignant reply. But soon a thought came to me. I took to adding on little sentences of my own to each question, innocent ones at first, to test whether either of our companions knew anything of the matter. And then, as I found that they showed no sign, I played a more dangerous game. He then told me he had been here 3 weeks and was being forcibly starved.
Starved? Did you manage to find out his name?
Gradidis. He was from Athens. But that was all I could discover, unfortunately. Another 5 minutes and I should have wormed out the whole story under their very noses. But at that instant, the door opened and a woman stepped into the room.
Seeing the young woman, a sobbing Mr. Cratides leapt from his chair to embrace her, calling her by the name Sophia. But he was quickly beaten by the bespectacled man, and the young lady was hastened out of the room by Mr. Latimer. Once the commotion had settled, Mr. Melas was paid 5 sovereigns and dismissed, but not without a warning that should he speak a word of this matter to a single soul, then God have mercy on his. But bravely, wishing to help the unhappy man, he has come to Holmes and his brother, seeking guidance. As Melas concludes his story, Sherlock looks to his brother, only to find he has fallen asleep in his armchair.
Mycroft! What steps have you taken so far?
Well, this was in all the daily papers. Anyone having information as to the whereabouts of a Greek gentleman named Paul Kratides who cannot speak English will be rewarded. A similar reward will be paid to anyone having information about a Greek lady whose first name is Sophia, but no answer as yet.
What about the Greek legation?
I have tried. They know nothing.
The head of the Athens police, then?
Sherlock has all the energy of the family. Will you take up the case by all means and let me know if you do any good?
Certainly. Mr. Melas, I should be extremely careful if I were you. But of course, through these advertisements, they will know that you've betrayed them.
The likable Mr. Melas is played here by Alkis Kritikos. Born in Nicosia, Cyprus, in 1947, Kritikos got his start on the British comedy series The Cuckoo Waltz. But his big break came in 1981 when he appeared in the Roger Moore Bond film For Your Eyes Only, where he played the role of Santos, one of Columbo's henchmen. He has continued to work in both Greek and British film and television for years, most recently lending his voice to the video game world as multiple characters in the hugely popular Assassin's Creed series. In the book, The Television Sherlock Holmes, Peter Haining reported, Alkis Kritikos was unable to see himself in the part because he was on holiday when it screened, in Greece, of course. But, reported Alkis, a friend in Greece did phone me later to say he'd seen the episode there, complete with subtitles, and he loved the whole thing. But as Mr. Melas exits the safety of the Diogenes Club, he is followed, unknowingly, by an angry Mr. Latimer.
It seems to me obvious that this Greek girl has been carried off by the young Englishman, Harold Latimer.
Carried off from where?
Athens, perhaps?
No. This Harold Latimer cannot speak a word of Greek. The girl speaks English fairly well. Inference that she has been in England some little time and he has not been in Greece.
Then let's presume that the girl was visiting England and that this Harold persuaded her to fly with him.
That is more probable.
Then the brother. That must be the relationship. Comes over from Greece in order to intervene. They seize him, use violence to force him to sign some documents, making over the girl's fortune to them. He's probably the trustee. This, as we have heard, he refuses to do.
So far. But these men will not stop now. Whatever happens, Watson, we must find them.
How can we?
Well, if our conjecture is correct, and the girl's name is or was Sophia Kratides, we should have no difficulty in tracing her. That must be our main hope. The brother, of course, is a complete stranger.
But as Holmes and Watson arrive back at Baker Street, they are troubled to see shadows moving under the door to their rooms.
Come in, Sherlock. Come in, sir. You don't expect such energy from me, do you, Sherlock?
Now, how did you get here?
I passed you while you were in the telegraph office. I had an answer to my advertisement. It came within a few minutes of your leaving.
And to what effect?
It is written with a J pen on royal cream paper by a middle-aged man with a weak constitution. Sir, in answer to your advertisement of today's date, I beg to inform you that I know the young lady in question very well. If you should care to call upon me, I could give you some particulars as to her painful history. She is at present at the Myrtles, Beckenham. Yours faithfully, J. Davenport. He writes from Lower Brixton. Do you not think we should drive there now and learn these particulars?
My dear Mycroft, The brother's life is more important than the sister's story. I think we should call at Scotland Yard for Inspector Gregson and then go straight out to Beckenham. Well, we know that a man is being done to death. Every hour may be vital.
Better pick up Mr. Malas on the way.
Why?
Because we may need a Greek interpreter.
Holmes reveals a pistol from his desk, which he readies in anticipation of their adversaries. But elsewhere, Mr. Malas is tricked out of his room and taken hostage at gunpoint by the bespectacled man, who drives him, once again, to the mysterious, distant manor. When Holmes and company arrive too late and learn of Malas's abduction, they hasten to Scotland Yard for assistance. But once there, Inspector Gregson proves less than cooperative.
It can't be done without a warrant. We are not disputing that, Inspector.
Even if they are criminals, it is a private house and the law demands... The law demands that we act quickly. Can you not find a magistrate to sign this warrant for us?
At this hour?
At this very minute. Or kidnapping could become murder.
I can but try.
Please do.
Meanwhile, the Greek interpreter once again filters questions to the captive, Mr. Cratides. But again failing to extract his cooperation, the captors have reached the end of their patience and inform Mr. Cratides that he has reached his last chance. He must sign now or be killed. But it is not until they threaten the life of Sophie, his sister, that he finally submits. And weeping aloud, he signs. Finished with him, Latimer drags Cratides away, and Malas is led off to his fate. The villains in tonight's play are portrayed by Mr. Nicholas Field in the role of Harold Latimer and Mr. George Castigan in the role of Wilson Kemp. Nicholas Field got his start in the 1970s, playing in various British shows including Z-Cars and Tales of the Unexpected, but he is probably best known for his role in the 1978 Derek Ford comedy What's Up, Nurse, where he played the lead, Dr. Robert Sweeney Todd. The Greek interpreter is actually his final listed credit on IMDb, and I couldn't find out much more information about him, except that he was married briefly to Deborah Watling, the actress who portrayed the 1960s Doctor Who companion, Victoria. George Castigan, aka Wilson Kemp, got his biggest break back when he starred in the film Rita, Sue, and Bob 2 in 1987, but has spent the majority of a respectable career appearing in many television series, including a 19-episode stint on So Haunt Me in the 90s, and a 54-episode run on Emmerdale, where he played Charlie Haynes. He also made an appearance in the 2007 series of Doctor Who, where he played Max Capricorn in The Voyage of the Damned. And he played a small part in the Clint Eastwood film Hereafter, starring Matt Damon. His last starring role was in the British crime series Happy Valley, which twice won the BAFTA for Best Drama Series. In the book Bending the Willow, David Stewart Davies reported, George Castigan, who played the major villain Kemp, did so with pebble glasses, a chilling grin, and a rather high sing-song voice, reminiscent of actor Peter Lorre, the Hollywood ne'er-do-well of the 40s. The similarity was intentional. Castigan asked Michael Cox if he could play the character that way, and Cox thought it would be intriguing and gave the actor the green light. And so, as Michael put it, we ended up with a Sherlock Holmes film containing an echo of one of my all-time favorite films, The Maltese Falcon. Back at Scotland Yard, the Holmes brothers finally receive their warrant and hasten to the house in Beckenham. But arriving at the house, they find they are too late. The criminals have flown the nest. Inside, Holmes examines the remnants of the interrogation room when he hears a cry from elsewhere in the building. He rushes upstairs, only to find the bodies of Cratides and Melas locked in a room filled with poisonous sulfur gas. They quickly pull them from the death chamber, but for one, it is too late.
The poor wretch must be Paul Cratides.
No more, I'm afraid. His life is over.
We should have been here sooner, Inspector!
Must have been dead about 4 hours.
The gas may have served as a coup de grace. Am I not right, Dr. Watson?
Beaten to death. But Mr. Melas still lives.
Quick! Let's get him out of here as fast as possible! Inspector Brandy! Relax, Mr. Melas, you're in safe hands. Get the ropes off.
As Watson attends to Mr. Melas, Holmes scours the house for a clue. And finding that the lady left without a struggle, he contemplates the situation. In his book, Michael Cox reflected, "At this point, only 2/3 of the way through our film, Conan Doyle's story ends. And this was the singular case of the Grecian interpreter, we are told, the explanation of which is still involved in some mystery, which it certainly is, and the part played by the girl is one of the most puzzling aspects of it. But rather than leaving our audience in suspense, we decided to follow the criminals and their victim's sister as they attempted to leave the country. In our version, Holmes glances into the girl's deserted bedroom and says that the lady left in haste but without a struggle, revealing once more his deep suspicions of the female sex. Considering that Sophie had seen her brother tortured by Kemp and Latimer, and yet left with them, he may perhaps be forgiven."
One wonders with how much remorse she abandoned her brother for Harold Latimer.
You still retain your low opinion of women.
In this instance, I feel I may be justified.
Holmes, they appear to have consulted a Bradshaw.
Checking the train tables, the brothers Holmes are able to deduce where the criminals will shortly be, and they race off to catch their men. Once aboard the train, Holmes queries the ticket inspector for information.
My name is Sherlock Holmes.
Well, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I've read about your case, sir.
Are we the last passengers from whom you have collected tickets?
Indeed, sir. I always work at the engine, start there, and work my way back to the guards.
Then you can help me. There are 3 passengers, 2 men and a woman, traveling together. They may not appear to be companions, but they will be in a compartment alone. The elder man wears thick-lensed glasses, and the younger might be called handsome. They will have a great deal of luggage marked for the continent. Have you seen such a party?
Yes, indeed. I can help you, Mr. Holmes.
I never doubted it.
There are 2 parties who fit that description, Mr. Holmes.
2.
In compartment B4
B4.
and D8.
Thank you, Inspector.
How do we know which 2 are the murderers?
It couldn't be simpler.
Producer Michael Cox initially expressed concerns about this part of the script. He wrote, "I originally had some misgivings about Mycroft departing so far from his routine and showing such energy, but remembering that on another occasion he acted as Watson's coachman, I agreed that it was possible. He is, however, allowed to take a nap on the journey." Watson attempts to wake Mycroft, but Holmes stops him, insisting it is too dangerous. Spying through the cabin window, Holmes examines the first group of travelers and uses deduction to rule them out.
Left-handed printer from Deptford. His elder brother drinks too much and is pained by his liver.
Not our man, then.
Not our man.
And the girl?
She knows neither of them. She's a machinist from Bradford who's going on holiday to find romance. Which means undoubtedly that the murderers are in compartment B4.
But when Holmes moves into the next cabin, poised to pounce on his prey, he finds only a couple, and speaking Greek to the lady, he confirms her identity. When Mr. Latimer begins to panic, Holmes urges him to remain in his seat.
Who the hell are you?
Third member of the party is absent, but I'm sure he will return. Miss Cratides, may I ask if you are this man's prisoner or companion?
Don't say anything. They have no right to ask you anything at all. If they were the police, they would have said so.
Why the police, Mr. Latimer? Were you expecting to meet them?
Look, I don't know who you are, nor do I know how you know my name. But I'm traveling with my fiancée to the continent to get married. So would you please leave us alone? Otherwise, I shall be obliged to call the guard.
Please do. I'm sure Dr. Watson would do it for you. Ah, I see you know who I am. Then may I be permitted to ask your fiancé the question again?
It's true what he said. We are going to be married.
Where?
In Athens.
I fear not.
And who is going to stop us?
If not the police, then I will. Miss Cratides, do you seriously want me to believe that you are leaving England willingly?
Yes.
To marry the man who has just murdered your brother?
That's not true.
Paul. Murdered. It isn't true, is it? He's going to meet us in Greece as soon as he's well. That's what you said to me.
And he will, Sophia, he will.
Your brother is dead, Miss Cratides.
Don't listen to him.
I found his body myself in the house in Beckenham. He had been murdered.
Tortured to death.
No, it can't be. Harold, tell me what's happened.
As for you, Mr. Latimer, Mr. Melas is alive as a witness to see you hanged.
Holmes cocks his pistol, but Latimer quickly grabs the lady, using her as a shield. He then shoves the girl at Holmes and attempts to flee out the exterior door of the compartment, but losing his footing, the door swings widely, and Mr. Latimer is crushed by a passing train. Sophia Cratides buries her face into Holmes's shoulder as Latimer dies a horrible death. Elsewhere on the train, the bespectacled Mr. Kemp dines with an unexpected new friend.
Trieste, I know very well. Very well indeed. I have friends there. Yes, but I need not elaborate, as I see you are men of the world, sir.
On the contrary, I've never left England in my life.
Haven't you?
No.
Then, sir, if you must choose one country, it must be Greece, the land of gods, olives, and intrigue. It is my destination, Greece.
Do you speak Greek, sir?
No, but one can always find a good interpreter.
As he rises to leave, Mycroft clumsily stumbles into his new acquaintance, apologizing for his size. Back in the cabin, Holmes attempts to understand the motives of Miss Cratides. But when Mr. Kemp returns and sees the intruders, he reaches for his gun, only to find it has vanished. But it quickly reappears, pressed against his own temple, in the hand of Mycroft Holmes. The elder brother smiles, and Holmes and Watson cannot help but to grin.
I believe this is your revolver, sir.
And with that, let's take a moment to say a few words about the actor behind Mycroft Holmes, Mr. Charles Gray. Born Donald Marshall Gray in August of 1928, he was the son of a surveyor, and during the World War II years, Gray attended Bournemouth Grammar School in Hampshire, alongside the likes of comedian Benny Hill. Measuring 6 foot 1 inch, he made his professional acting debut playing the part of Charles the Wrestler in Robert Atkins' 1952 stage play, As You Like It, and over the next decade continued to hone his craft as a Shakespearean in Regent's Park, Stratford-on-Avon, and the Old Vic, where he worked alongside the likes of Richard Burton, John Neville, and Paul Rogers. During the 1960s, Gray worked hard to establish himself as a dependable character actor, winning, among other accolades, the Clarence Derwent Award for Best Supporting Actor for his part in the controversial play Poor Beatos. And his highly trained and versatile vocal talents would come to define him when he joined the newly formed Royal Shakespeare Company in 1962. By 1966, he was imperceptibly dubbing dialogue for many actors, including Jack Hawkins, after the veteran performer's voice was taken by throat cancer. One of said films for which Charles Gray provided such dubbing was Lawrence of Arabia. But 1967 was the start of Gray's most prolific period as a screen actor, and it began when he starred opposite Peter O'Toole and Omar Sharif in the Sam Spiegel production of The Night of the Generals. This led to him being cast as Deco Henderson in the Bond film You Only Live Twice, followed, perhaps most famously, by his appearance as the feline-stroking, velvety-voiced criminal mastermind Ernst Blofeld in another Bond film, Diamonds Are Forever. At his most satanic, he portrayed the evil villain Mokata in the Hammer film The Devil Rides Out, where he shared the screen with a young Rosalind Lander, also known as Helen Stoner in the Granada series adaptation of The Speckled Band. At his most outlandish, he contributed to the cult classic The Rocky Horror Picture Show, wherein he played the criminologist, and, incidentally, a dance instructor.
It's just a jump to the left. With your hands on your hips.
Fans of that film still refer to his character as No Neck, since the high-riding collar of his jacket in that picture makes it appear as though he has no neck. Rocky Horror was a film which he claimed he never saw. Among Sherlockians, he is of course best remembered for the Granada Holmes series, but it wasn't his first stint in the shoes of Sherlock's big brother. Gray also portrayed Mycroft in the 1976 pastiche film The 7% Solution, in which he and Watson trick Sherlock Holmes into seeking psychological treatment from Dr. Sigmund Freud. That film also, incidentally, featured Jeremy Kemp, who would go on to play Grimsby Roylott in The Speckled Band. In the industry, Charles Gray was well-liked and well-known for never forgetting a line. Rocky Horror creator Richard O'Brien recalled, "He was a charming man with a dry wit and a low tolerance of pomposity in others." He was also known to famously and boisterously entertain friends into the small hours of the morn on his apartment balcony, including his close friend, Ava Gardner. And when asked why he insisted on cutting such a self-important dash, he would protest, saying, "I'm not in the least aristocratic in real life, old boy. I much prefer a pint at the local." With hundreds of acting credits to his name, Charles Gray worked constantly until the time of his death. He passed away on March 7th, 2000, at the age of 71, from cancer. As Kemp is finally carted off to jail, Watson and the brothers Holmes make their way across the train platform once again.
Well, brother mine, we seem to be heading down the path of crime.
The only path I intend to take is the door to the Diogenes Club, which I shall close behind me.
What'll become of her?
After questioning, nothing. It's not a crime to have a cold heart and not a single shred of compassion.
Watson takes his leave, and Holmes disappears into the steam and the fog and the darkness. In a study in celluloid, Michael Cox remembered, "All of this was shot on the Bluebell line at the Sheffield Park in Sussex. We chose this extravagant location not only because it offers a fine period station, but also because the rolling stock, impeccably maintained by the Bluebell Railway Preservation Society, includes the London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway's Directors' Saloon. In this grand setting, Mycroft strikes up a conversation with Wilson Kemp about foreign travel, Greece, and the employment of interpreters. But the ending of this particular adaptation varies significantly from the Conan Doyle story, and to David Stuart Davies, Michael Cox attempted to clarify the reasons for the change. He said, "It's a super story up to the last few paragraphs, where I think Conan Doyle thought, oh, I've wrapped that up and it's clear that these people found their comeuppance at some future date. And so it ended somewhat abruptly, but we wanted to give it a grandstand finale." Original air date on the ITV network was September 1st, 1985 at 9:30 p.m. Dramatized by Derek Marlowe and directed by Alan Grint. Now, Alan Grint we've met before on The Naval Treaty and The Crooked Man, and we'll see him one more time for The Final Problem. But this episode is the first of two entries by writer Derek Marlowe, who would also go on to pen the Granada adaptation of The Resident Patient. But Marlowe was known for more than just his contributions to film and television. Born in Perivale, Middlesex, he studied literature at Queen Mary College until he was eventually expelled for satire and kindred villainies due to the fact that he wrote and edited an article for the college magazine, a parody of J.D. Salinger's novel A Catcher in the Rye, which reflected on what Marlowe called the boredom of college seminars. Upon leaving the university, he managed to share a flat with a few of his fellow writers, Tom Stoppard and Piers Paul Reed, and the trio encouraged and inspired one another. In his lifetime, he wrote 4 plays and 9 novels, starting with A Dandy in Aspic, an espionage thriller which he penned in just 4 weeks, and which was subsequently turned into a movie directed by Anthony Mann, starring Lawrence Harvey. Marlowe wrote the screenplay. He went on to win an Emmy, as well as a Writers Guild Award, for his authorship of the BBC series The Search for the Nile, starring Kenneth Haig. And he contributed his pen to numerous other award-winning productions, including The 2 Miss Grenvilles and the Angela Lansbury series, Murder, She Wrote. But while his light burned brilliantly and brightly, it was not meant to last. While working in Los Angeles, he contracted leukemia and died of a brain hemorrhage following a liver transplant operation. At the time of his death, he was working on a 10th novel, Black and White, which was posthumously finished by his close friend, renowned author Nicholas Royal. Several of Marlowe's screenplays remain unfilmed, including a draft script for the 1977 James Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me, and a screenplay which he wrote for director Ridley Scott, called The Night. Producer Michael Cox also held a special fondness for Marlowe. In A Study in Celluloid, he wrote, Derek Marlowe, who scripted The Resident Patient as well as The Greek Interpreter, died in 1996 at the early age of 58. His obvious love for the canon shines through the scripts again and again. In The Resident Patient, he makes a most appropriate reference to Holmes' monograph on tobacco ash, and even a tiny detail, like Watson's love of sea stories, is exemplified by the model ship he is building. In The Greek Interpreter, he revels in the process of deduction and the relationship between Holmes and his brother. He was a skillful dramatist, and a couple of Jeffrey Archer novels gained from his television adaptations. I discovered him as a novelist, however, the author of 2 very unusual thrillers, A Dandy in Aspic and Echoes of Celandine, both of which were successfully filmed. The Memoirs of a Venus Lackey is an ingenious fantasy, and A Single Summer with L.B. is one of the best accounts of that extraordinary spell on Lake Geneva, which Byron spent with the Shelleys and Claire Clairmont. I tried more than once to set up a television film of that, so it was sad to discover that by the time he died, all Derek's work had slipped out of print. But there are, thank goodness, libraries. Derek Marlowe died on November 14th, 1996, at the age of 58. Well, this episode is certainly top tier, and the talents of the entire cast and crew are evident throughout. But it does have some significant derivations from the original text, so let's examine it as we're joined by my accomplice, Luke. Who would dream that our Holmes has a brother, that with one such quick mind there's another, that would be even keener, were but Mycroft much leaner. It's his indolence lets that mind smother. The Greek Interpreter Limerick by Isaac Asimov. Well, I wanted to start off with just a little bit of housekeeping, because in the last episode, The Copper Beeches, when we were doing voting, I placed my vote at 9.5 Persian slippers, and when I listened back to it, I thought, why did I say that? I meant to say 9.9, but 9.5 is what came out of my mouth, so I blame the cough syrup, but I'm revising my vote to 9.9.
My vote stays.
Nice. Well, The Greek Interpreter. Lots of great Baker Street B-roll at the beginning of this episode.
Yeah.
I actually really like that. I like the fact that it's throughout the show, and obviously it's the stuff probably shot on the same day as the intro, but I love it because you can, if you look, you can find all the familiar faces that you've seen at the start of each episode.
Yeah.
The window kids are hanging out at 221B at one point.
Yeah. Would you say that those could possibly be the irregulars?
Yeah, well, what's funny is, before I kind of made that connection, I did actually think that. I thought that it probably was the irregulars, but who knows?
I think it's just kids.
Well, I mean, it's obviously the same group of kids from the window shop.
Yeah.
But
well, it'd be cool to think they got a shout out in the credits then.
That's true. Yeah.
Let's just say they are, and that's our contribution to the game.
I wish they were, but it's definitely, that one kid is very distinctive looking, and he's not present later when the irregulars are.
Well, it's because he's too well known.
Yeah.
Can't show his face.
Well, this episode it's pretty great. I don't know. I've never really considered it in my top of the top tier, but obviously comparing it to later stuff, it is top tier. But it is great. It's pretty great.
It's pretty great. I mean, it's a weird one. I don't think I realized it until this time around that it basically all takes place in one day or a couple of hours, really.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's one that always has an impression on me. Like, I always remember it.
I am the opposite in a way. I kind of don't really think about this one very much, but having had to do the research now and having looked into it, I have a ton more respect for it.
Yeah.
Just the performances, especially Mr. Kemp. He's top tier villain material for sure.
Yeah.
And I mentioned in the main podcast that it was his idea to kind of act like Peter Lorre, and that Michael Cox was like, sounds good to me, because he loved the Maltese Falcon, but I never really noticed it. I mean, it didn't stick out as like a direct rip-off, until I read that, but it was subtle enough to be good.
I always wondered what the accent was.
Yeah.
And if it was him just doing Peter Lorre.
Well, Peter Lorre was born in Hungary, but I think lived in Germany. That's where he did most of his film work, so I am assuming it was somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique accent.
Yeah. But again, it's
more than just an accent. It's a performance.
Yeah.
And in the story, Watson refers to it as St. Vichu's dance, which I guess is like a term for a neurological disorder.
Yeah.
The twitchiness and the laughing in between.
And yeah, how does he mention it in the story? I can't remember. What does he say?
His features were peaky and sallow, and his little pointed beard was thready and ill-nourished. He pushed his face forward as he spoke, and his lips and eyelids were continually twitching, like a man with St. Vichu's dance.
Interesting.
So at least that was Mr. Melas's diagnosis.
Yeah, and interestingly, I mean, that character in the story is very different than in the show. I mean, in the story, he's supposed to be an elderly gentleman,
right,
with a beard.
He does remind me of Dave Foley, though, a little bit.
Yeah, there's definitely no getting around that.
It's hard to imagine Dave Foley as a villain.
Yeah, exactly. He also reminds me a little bit of the villain from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, we talked about the street Arabs, so let's just start at the beginning of the episode.
Was it a zither intro?
Maybe a bouzouki? Is that how you say it?
I think bouzouki. I don't know.
Yeah, the Greek guitar.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I didn't see any notes about that in the reading. It works.
Just, when it came in, it reminded me of The Third Man or something.
Yeah, I liked it. Well, I don't know if you have anything prior to this, but my first note is Watson walking through the Diogenes Club and going his own way, ditching Holmes, and kind of looking at the people.
Yeah.
I wrote down the word delicious because Watson is just like taking everything in with his eyes and smiling and watching every moment. I really like that. That's a great scene.
Well, I did have a couple notes before that.
Yeah.
Which was when Holmes is talking about Mycroft and he says, I suppose you'd like to meet him. And he says, well, of course I do.
Yeah.
Even if just to prove that he exists. Just that, like, all these S's at the end of it.
Yeah.
And then his smile. There's this... I was just watching it and I had to pause it for a second. And I paused on Watson's smile and it was so hearty and proud and could barely contain himself that he was going to meet him.
Yeah. The only thing bad about the intro scene with them together is how short it is because it's a pretty short one. But it's great. I like it when Watson is like circling Holmes and the camera kind of just follows him as he's watching him with big wide eyes as he's talking about his brother. I liked it.
I also like when they go to the Diogenes Club and Holmes hands Watson the pen to sign in.
Yeah.
It's just, you do it.
Yeah. There's a little flub in the Diogenes Club. I don't know if you noticed it, but when they finally make it into the stranger's room, did you notice the door slams on Watson's foot?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. The stranger's room, as it's referred to, the room where they meet Mycroft, I made a note that it's the lighting in that scene is just really great. I don't know if it was a real window or a real location or a real sun or what it was, but it was really nice. That whole scene, the whole scene with Mr. Malos and everything.
I would also say I actually watched it twice, and because I know we got a lot of comments on the Stephen Fry YouTube video.
Yeah.
People saying, "Oh, the episodes are on BritBox." Like we do know that now.
Yeah.
But I will say, I watched it on my American Blu-ray. And then I watched it on BritBox. And it seems to be the same transfer. The captions are different, wildly different. And it looks like it's way more compressed. So it's the same footage, but I was watching that scene in particular, and I was actually switching back and forth. And if you're looking at, like, Holmes's hair or Mycroft's hair, you can see the detail fall away.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we could have a whole separate show about this because I recently picked up the American Blu-ray set.
Yeah.
Because I had been watching the Spanish import Blu-ray set, which I bought because I got it before the American one was available. And I really want to go back and compare A-B because I feel like the American set is way noisier than the Spanish set. And maybe it's because there's a lot more
noise reduction,
right? Compression and stuff on the Spanish one, but every time there's like a tweed suit, I can just see it's just noisy.
Yeah,
in the American ones, and
yeah,
it's a matter of taste. I know some people prefer that. I hate to say it, but I find myself preferring the Spanish release.
Yeah,
but it also depends on your TV. It depends on a lot of things. But,
sure.
But yeah, one day we'll do a comparison of all the different versions.
Well, if you ever watch something with subtitles, the BritBox version is worth watching.
Yeah.
For how frankly bad they are.
Really? Because I actually noticed, I was skipping around and watching some other episodes, and I was noticing how bad they are on the American version.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some flubs in this one, but when they're looking at the billiard marker in the other, there's some weird changes.
Yeah.
He says the brilliant marker in the other, and then instead of royal artillery, he says relativity.
Really?
I fancy.
Wow.
And then expression of authority and sunbaked skin, they change to especially if authority and some big skin.
I wonder if it's like a bot making the subtitles
it
or
could
something.
Be.
I mean,
there were certain... I do think sometimes you can tell if it's a British person or an American person.
Yeah.
Maybe a bot, but...
Right. I mean, I just happened to watch The Devil's Foot last night, and there's a few parts where multiple people are talking, and they just leave the subtitles completely out.
Yeah.
Like, we can't figure out what's being said, so
Right.
let's just not even try.
Yeah.
But it was really unfortunate because there's actually some things I was hoping to figure out what they were saying. Well, let's get back to the show. Mr. Malos. What do you think of Mr. Malos?
I like him.
Yeah. I think he's good. I think he really is.
I don't think he really matches the drawing.
Right.
But I think he just has a person. I mean, he's not like anyone else in the show.
Yeah. He's very likable.
Yeah.
He's just like a very nice
He's very
person.
pure.
Yeah.
He's trying to help his poor man.
Yeah, which it's funny that he is so likable in this because he actually got his big break playing a Bond villain, or at least a henchman of a Bond villain. Yeah, I like him. I think he does a great job. So correct me if I'm wrong, but they go to Scotland Yard in this episode when Mr. Malos disappears.
Yeah.
I believe this is the first time they go to Scotland Yard, right? So far in the series.
I think so. But they don't actually go in the book, right?
Right, but well, I mean they pick up Inspector
Gregson.
But yeah, they don't actually go to Scotland Yard. But I'm just wondering, I was kind of just taxing my brain to remember, do they ever go to Scotland Yard again in the series? If they do, it doesn't look like that. I don't remember there being a nighttime scene in Scotland Yard, you know what I mean?
No.
But not to skip to the books too much yet, but Gregson in this episode, he's actually in another story or two. He's in The Red Circle and Wisteria Lodge, but he's not in the show versions of either one. In Wisteria Lodge, there was two inspectors, Gregson and Baines, but they just wrote Gregson out and made it all about Baines. And then in Red Circle, I think they changed him to to a different inspector named Hawkins or something like that. But anyway, we'll come back to that when we get to those episodes, I guess. But yeah, this is Inspector Gregson's only appearance in the Granada series.
I wonder if they made that scene longer at Scotland Yard just so he had something more to do in the episode, because it's a good scene, but it's not in the story.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as we both know, like they kind of changed this one quite a bit in the third act, so I feel like they were probably just filling time. But it's probably it's maybe the best scene in the show. Is one of my favorite lines maybe from this episode is, "At this hour." Yeah. At this very minute. That was a great Jeremy Brett line.
And the law can't be rushed and all that. Like, it's good. And I think it just breaks it up because otherwise, we're introduced to Mycroft. Mycroft introduces us to Malos, and then they go to the house.
Right.
And it's a really short story otherwise.
Yeah, no, it's a well-constructed episode. I mean, I actually have some big questions about the changes that were made. Once they get on the train, that's obviously not in the story.
Right.
And I go back and forth between whether I love it or don't. And I feel like it is well constructed, it is well done, but I wonder if it's over the top. Like, when he starts doing the deductions on the train, I like the way that Holmes is almost kind of using his magical abilities, in the real world, in real time,
right,
quickly when needed. But it's also almost feels like it's straining credulity a little bit when the things he says, like, she's on holiday to find romance. You know what I mean? I feel like if we were given the opportunity, and if Holmes were to explain it to us, maybe we'd go, aha, that was great. But because we know that it's not from the canon and that it was made up by this writer for this story,
sure,
it kind of just has like a smack of less than perfect.
Genuine, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, I guess, sure. But I guess, like you said, if it's just magical and maybe she's just that easy to read for Holmes, then we just have to accept it and let it go.
And really, I think this is the only time in the show that happens.
There's a deduction that's not written.
But it's also a deduction that's not explained. You know what I mean? Because that's the whole point of Sherlock Holmes.
Well, that's true.
Is that he wows you and then gives you the explanation, and you're like, oh my God, that was amazing.
Yeah, but they're hunting somebody on the train at that moment. He can't be like, now look, Watson, let's break this one down.
That's true.
If he's just showing off and, on to the next cabin.
The flip side of that coin is that I think my favorite line in the entire episode is Mr. Kemp when he's eating with Mycroft, and he says, one can always find a good interpreter. Like, that's a creepy line.
There's a lot of good stuff on that train.
Yeah.
And I like that Sherlock is smoking right in front of the smoking is prohibited sign.
Yeah.
And then when they're going to get caught for not having tickets, he just says, my name is Sherlock Holmes. And they're like, oh, Sherlock Holmes.
Well, yeah, there's a little note in one of the books that pertains to that ticket taker.
Yeah.
I thought I'd read it because I didn't put it in the show, but I thought it was fun. It's actually in Keith Frankel's book, Granada's Greatest Detective, and he writes about this scene. There appears to be an unscripted piece of comic byplay between the pair when Holmes's brow clashes somewhat clumsily with the peak of his admirer's cap, prompting a priceless exchange of glances, the former dismissively exasperated, the latter discernibly amused. Both players remain utterly committed to the moment, incorporating their faux pas into the exchange and reacting with total truth, thus elevating what should have been nothing more than a mechanical piece of exposition into something to savor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he nails it, and that's exactly what I thought.
Yeah, and the ticket taker's like, whoops, and then Holmes looks at Watson and is just like, look at this guy.
It's almost as though Holmes looks at the cameraman and goes, "Are we keeping that?"
Yeah.
And then he's like, "We're all still in character? Okay,
yeah,
keeping it."
But
But Jeremy Brett's look is perfect either way.
Yeah.
It just works.
Mm-hmm.
So it was.
It's great.
Yeah, I like that moment. Speaking of Jeremy Brett's interesting performances in this episode, I can't tell if it's Jeremy Brett who carries Melas out of the sulfur room.
Yeah.
You think it's actually him?
Yep. I think what happens is, because I ran it back.
Yeah.
So they kind of block him. I can't remember who, if it's Watson or whoever, but somebody comes in and they kind of scoot out of frame.
Yeah.
I think because he stands up and gets on his shoulder.
Right.
But then he carries him out.
Oh, okay.
But he's actually carrying him out.
Yeah, well, that was my biggest question was, did he lift him off the ground and put him on his shoulder?
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, he does jolt him up.
Yeah.
But then I can't remember if the camera pans or if somebody just crosses, but there's a little trickery, but then he's got him on his shoulder. I thought it was like...
Yeah. I mean, it's almost not necessary because you don't really see his face. You don't see Jeremy Brett's face, so it could have been a stuntman doing it. Though. But it's just, you can tell by his hands and his body that it almost certainly is him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like amazing that he was just willing to literally put another person on his shoulder and carry him out.
Committed.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
There's also, speaking of things, physical things like that.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning, when they get back to Baker Street, there's a bunch of street urchins run by.
Yeah.
And one falls off the curb.
Right.
And just lands right on his knee. I can never tell if that was staged or not. But he definitely gets up and runs away like it really hurt.
Yeah, I watched that a few times just for that reason, and I do feel like it was fake.
Yeah.
Because he falls in a way that was pretty safe.
Yeah.
You know.
It was pretty good.
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
It seemed like a weird thing to just throw in there, but...
Yeah. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but back to the sulfur room.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to spoil all of my best bits, but Watson's line, "Inspector, brandy!"
Yeah.
You know, like, that's the ultimate Watson demanding brandy line right there.
Yeah. Really angry.
Yeah, it actually made me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Like, it's all his only power is to command a brandy in this moment.
Yeah.
You know? Speaking of Watson in the house there at the end, it really, when you think about it, didn't make much sense that Watson would accompany Holmes and Mycroft onto the train when we've got an injured man who needs a doctor and a police constable there with nothing else to do.
He left him with some brandy and ammonia at regular intervals.
Right, but I think the thing that would have made sense was if Watson stayed with the patient and the cop went to arrest the criminal.
Right, and got the witness to be talking again.
Yeah.
Right. There's some good stuff. I mean, they also, Holmes also yells at the inspector. He's like, "We should have been here sooner, Inspector."
Yeah.
And then the Morticia lighting on Holmes when he's looking through the rooms. Just another nice little touch.
Yeah, when he's looking through the rooms, I had just read the story immediately before watching the series, and he says, when Melas describes the room, how it was lit by a single lamp.
Yeah.
It's like, that makes sense in the story because they didn't want to show him too much.
Right.
But the single lamp in the series is a gigantic chandelier above their heads, which is completely lighting the scene. But they still said it in the description when Melas is talking.
Yeah.
Which I guess I appreciated because let's stay close to the canon, but it really didn't make sense.
Yeah, but I think this is another one of those things like the scandal of the street lamp in...
Right. But I mean, they could have just had a lamp on the table and made it really, really dark.
Yeah, but they're doing a lot of crane shots and things, so maybe they just did it by accident, or maybe they're just like, it looks cool, let's leave it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm just nitpicking, but it was
But there was no Japanese mail.
Yeah, no suit of armor. You would think that would have been an easy thing to add.
Yeah, but they did cut away to a bunch of like little trinkets.
Yeah.
That were probably vaguely Japanese.
Yeah, I meant to go back and watch it a third time and triple check for the Japanese armor, but I'm assuming it wasn't there.
I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
Maybe it was so poorly lit in the background.
Well, that's possible.
By that one lamp.
Yeah.
Is it just me, or does Harold Latimer resemble the wigged Molly from the Abominable Bride episode of the new Sherlock?
If I'm being totally honest, I have zero memory of the wigged Molly in the Abominable Bride.
Well, for people listening, that's all I could see when I was watching Latimer, is it just looked like Molly.
Interesting. Latimer, I really have nothing against the actor who played him. I think he was fine in this episode.
Yeah.
They had some weird choices for him, though, like the close-up shots in the train. I as we know from previous episodes, they had difficulties with different train cars. They tried to recreate them, and they didn't work. And this feels like it's a real train, and so you don't have breakaway walls, so the camera is going to be right up in your face.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of close-ups of Latimer in those moments right before he runs for it, and it just gives that whole scene a very kind of like Hammer horror or Amicus horror 70s style feel to me.
It's like the low angle shots.
Low angle, like almost vignetting his face, you know what I mean? And then it's even compounded when he finally falls out the train car and Holmes is grabbing, Sophia and Watson and keeping them from it's very schlocky feeling,
Yeah, but you know what I always thought it reminded me of theater in that moment when he dies.
Yeah.
Because like the other train car is probably just a projector. But the music, I always thought that's a really great bit of music when he dies.
Yeah, it does work. I'm not saying that it's bad. It's just it doesn't feel like most of the rest of the show. That little sequence, it's very different in style.
But, I guess if you get crammed into a little room that you got to shoot in
and
make different choices. Maybe they only had one lens that day.
Yeah. We've been there.
If you also look at Holmes in that scene, he appears just disgusted by Sophia.
Yeah.
He's like grinding his teeth.
Well, that leads me to a question mark, which is, what do we think of the actress who played Sophia? I kind of feel like, I don't want to say she was bad, but I feel like because I love the show so much, I've always just given her a free pass. Like, she's good, she's fine, she's good enough. But kind of watching it again this time a few times, I was like, another actress could have brought more to that part, even with just the little she had to work with. I don't know. I just felt like she was just very nothing. Like she was very nonchalant. And again, maybe that was a choice so that to reinforce Holmes's distaste for women that they touch upon. But
well, I guess that's a good point. In the story, they have that room lit with one light, and they put sticking plaster on his face so that his sister wouldn't recognize him. So I don't know if that was like because everybody just had a low opinion of her.
Yeah. Did they say that in the story? I always thought it was just to keep him gagged, essentially.
No, it's just so they would.
She wouldn't recognize her brother. Right, yeah, interesting. Well,
this episode was the first time I've ever heard of a sticking plaster.
Yeah.
Because we live in America, we call them Band-Aids.
Yeah.
Which is a brand name, or adhesive bandage. But it was just something about when he says, "My poor man with a sticking plaster upon his face." I remember thinking when I was younger, I was like, plaster? He had plaster on his face?
Yeah, I really had no idea. I thought it was, drywall adhesive or something.
Yeah. Well, we're American.
Yeah.
Band-Aids.
So I think when Kemp finally comes into the train car, they say, Mr. Kemp, thank you for joining us, or whatever they say. But actually, there's no point in the episode where his name is mentioned until that moment. Yeah. And in fact, in the story, I think they say...
It's at the end.
Yeah, we're like, we found out his name was Mr. Kemp later on. But I guess you could assume that Sophia Cratides told them his name in one of those in-between moments.
Right.
But I was, when I was making my notes for this, I was like, what is that guy's name?
Me too. I was just putting Dave Foley.
Yeah.
But as a change from the book, because in the book it just says Latimer and Kemp both end up dead.
Yeah.
With knife wounds, and the police were like, well, maybe they killed each other. And then I think Watson says, or she got her revenge.
Yeah, the story actually ends here. I'll just read the last paragraph. It says, Months afterwards, a curious newspaper cutting reached us from Budapest. It told how 2 Englishmen who had been traveling with a woman met a tragic end. They had each been stabbed, it seems, and the Hungarian police were of the opinion that they had quarreled and had inflicted mortal injuries upon each other. Holmes, however, is, I fancy, of a different way of thinking, and he holds to this day that if one could find the Grecian girl, one might learn how the wrongs of herself and her brother came to be avenged. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this episode could be called The Mystery of Sophia Cratides, to be honest, because, you know, in that ending, in the original last paragraph, well, the writers of this episode and of the series in general, sure, they had to tack on an ending that was exciting, but they had that ending.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they kind of just chose to...
They kind of removed her agency.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like I can't believe there couldn't have been a way that she could have had her comeuppance. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it could have been written.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I don't dislike what we have. It struck me as strange that, yes, they reworked the end, but they also kind of just left that part out. But I guess it wasn't clear. So,
right.
So
that's true.
There's that. So here's a question for you. As they take Kemp away after they have parked the train and they're all walking through the steam.
Yeah, and then Holmes goes the other way.
Yeah, but before that, when they're hauling Kemp off, I don't know if you noticed this. What is he doing? If you look at him, he's doing like, I can't tell if he's laughing or crying or blind because they took his glasses off. Or did you notice this?
I thought he was just,
wincing.
You'll never take me alive, copper. That kind of a thing.
Really? It's really weird. Look at it closely because he looks more like Dave Foley doing a comedy routine than ever. It took me a while to even come up with the idea that he's probably squinting and trying to see where he's going because they took his glasses off.
Okay, maybe. But
yeah, it's hard to know because at moments he looks like he's laughing, it looks like he's crying. What it reminds me of is in Aliens, when Michael Biehn has got the alien blood squirted all over him, and Sigourney Weaver is like pulling him out, and he's just like agonizing, and like he's got his mouth open, and
right.
It's
maybe he was, playing up his Saint Vichu's dance at the end there, and they just cut the audio.
Maybe
that's too
he's
much.
Off his meds. Yeah.
But then where does Holmes go?
Well, it's interesting. I don't remember which book it says it in, but one of the books is, it's the most beautiful moment in the entire series when he walks off into the mist. And another book was like, what a totally pointless moment because Holmes just turns around and goes the other direction for no reason. But it's good enough that they used it in another episode later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, turning over to the books, this one was published in 1893, but the date of the actual story is a big question mark too. I don't know if in the Baring Gould they talk about this, but in the Klinger book, the story starts off by Watson saying, "During my long acquaintance with Sherlock Holmes, I never met his relations." But according to the dating of this story, it depends on which book you look at. According to the Klinger, Watson has known Holmes for 12 years at this point. And according to Martin Dakin, he puts it at 8 years. The Baring Gould, I think, has other possibilities listed.
Yeah.
But in any case, 8 years is a long time to know somebody and live with them and not know that they have a brother.
Sure. Not
impossible. But there happens to be one of those rather fantastical notes in the Klinger book that we sometimes talk about. I don't know if it's part of the game or part of just some scholarly journal that
I wonder if it's the one that I'm thinking of.
Okay, well here I'll read you the first part because there are many notes about this in the Klinger book. The first note reads, "Ronald Knox, regarded as the father of Sherlockian criticism, ponders in The Mystery of Mycroft why Holmes has not previously mentioned his brother, when Holmes admits here that he communicated with Mycroft regularly. Quote, it's incredible that Holmes should have made no mention of a surviving member of his family, and one who lived so close, if there had been no reason behind his silence, end quote. Knox contends that Mycroft was in league with Professor Moriarty, whom Holmes combats in The Final Problem, and his arguments are considered in further detail in the notes to come." So that was one note. Let me read you the next note really quick.
I wonder if I can guess it.
Knox points out that even before Mycroft consulted Sherlock, he advertised in the papers for information, a step that seems foolish, even dangerous, as it would have immediately alerted the culprits to Mr. Melas's lack of discretion about what he had witnessed. Yet Knox sees this as further evidence that Mycroft, too clever to make such a naive error, was in league with the villains. Quote, he was, in effect, sending a signal to his accomplices in Beckenham to say, your secret is out, and the police are already on your track. Charcoal for two. And believe it or not, there are actually 2 more notes that are justifying that in this book, but I won't read those. Was that your guess?
No.
Okay.
My guess was that Watson is Jack the Ripper.
Is that in that book?
Yep.
Wow. Well,
I don't think that's true.
Yeah. I mean, they're both doctors, so it has to be true.
Yeah.
Speaking of doctors and science, there's a segue for you. There is a moment in this story, and I can't remember where it is in the story exactly, where they're talking about astronomy.
The obliquity of the ecliptic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in A Study in Scarlet, which obviously there's no episode for, there's kind of a famous exchange between Holmes and Watson where Holmes explains to Watson why he doesn't know certain things, and he's very proud of the fact that he didn't find out till very recently that the Earth even revolved around the sun or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have pointed out that there's an inconsistency here, but in the Bering Ghoul, there is a note, which I won't read, but the Sherlockians like to justify that by saying, well, if you reference this other story, it's clear that Holmes has a sense of humor, and he's pulling Watson's leg in other places, so clearly he was pulling Watson's leg in A Study in Scarlet.
Right.
Because, look, he's scientifically literate in this next episode, this next story, you know.
Yeah.
But I choose to defer to, I mean, it's better to have, I guess, in the mind of the reader and of the completist and in your imagination, it's great to have it justified. But me, personally, I prefer to go, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle changed the story.
Yeah.
He clearly set it up a certain way in this one and then changed it later and just, cleaned up the edges.
Yeah.
But I actually kind of like the idea that Holmes doesn't know that the Earth revolves around the sun.
Right, because it doesn't have an impact on
right. As he says, he only has so much space in his mental closet or whatever.
And didn't Einstein say something like, paraphrasing here, but anything you can look up on Google is not worth remembering?
Right. Yeah, he doesn't want to fill up his brain with stuff he can look up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know, but it just, because we're never going to cover Study in Scarlet, it seemed like an excuse to talk about that for half a second.
Well, one other question I have about this story versus the series, why'd they change it from charcoal to sulfur?
Honestly, I think it was probably just because
everybody knows what charcoal is, and they wouldn't understand. I think it'd be more confusing to think, well, I don't understand how charcoal can kill somebody. You know what I mean? Yeah.
But sulfur is a little bit more mysterious.
There's a good Sidney Paget drawing of them going in and Holmes saying, "It's charcoal," he cried. He's wearing a Homburg.
Yeah.
Or maybe a trilby, but
yeah.
But it matches the episode.
Yeah, I like that drawing.
Yeah.
I like that drawing a lot.
It's a good one.
The only other note I had from the books was actually from the Baring Gould, and I just like these little notes regarding the manuscripts, the original manuscripts. It says, on December 19th, 1964, the New York Times reported from London that the manuscript of The Adventure of the Greek Interpreter was purchased today at auction for $12,600 by the author's son, Adrian Conan Doyle. The manuscript appears to be the only complete one from the memoirs that has been sold on the open market. According to Mr. Lou D. Feldman of the House of El Deef, who exhibited the manuscript at the dinner of the Baker Street Irregulars on January 8, 1965, $12,600 is not only the highest price ever paid for a Sherlock Holmes manuscript or any other manuscript by Conan Doyle, but also the highest price ever paid for a manuscript written in English by an author who lived during the 20th century.
I wonder if that's still true.
It's all interesting. Maybe in converted dollars it might still be true. But it's all interesting, but I think the most interesting point of that whole thing is the fact that it was his son who bought it.
Yeah.
I wonder...
How did she get it, this woman?
Well, that's what I wonder. I wonder if when Conan Doyle was alive, you know what I mean, we know he kind of, I think he auctioned some off for charity at some point, and I wonder if the family was like, we got to get all these back.
Yeah.
At whatever cost.
Yeah.
Because it was like the most expensive, manuscript. I just thought it was interesting. And so we talked about another manuscript at one point, and the note in the book said, nobody knows where that one is.
Right.
And I would guess if it's anywhere, it's probably in the possession of the Conan Doyle family.
Could be, yeah.
Because they seem to have wanted to collect them back up.
So, I was curious about the Greek in the show.
Mm-hmm.
So I pulled out my iPhone Google Translator.
Oh, nice.
And I was using it to translate the audio
Mm-hmm.
as well as the writing on the slate.
Yeah.
The Google Translate app, you can actually point it at stuff and it'll read it to you.
Yeah.
It wouldn't do the handwriting, but now there's a feature. Sounds like an ad, but it's not. There's a feature now you can use your finger to write. And so I just wrote what he wrote on the slate, and it would read it back to me. And it was basically exactly what was in the book.
Yeah.
But the reason I did it was because when Kemp goes up to him and he says, "This obstinacy will not do," whatever.
Yeah.
I thought, is there a Greek word for obstinacy? And it was perseverance. Is how it came up.
Interesting.
When he did the translation, I mean.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So if you do need a Greek interpreter,
Mm-hmm.
you can download one. I feel like Google should give us like $1.
Yeah, well, it's good information.
But yeah, I was writing it in with my finger, and I wrote a couple of the letters wrong. And when he says, "I care not," it was matching the story where he would say, "I care not," and then he would say, "These people are foreigners," when they were doing the double lines.
Mm-hmm.
I put too many words in and too many letters, and I got, "I don't care about vegan meats."
Interesting.
But I retyped it, and it said, "I don't care. These people are foreigners."
Well, maybe there's some bugs that still need to be worked out.
Yeah. Or he just doesn't care about vegan meats.
Could be that. Well, let's come to the end of this review session here. The good, the bad, the Jeremy. I feel like we've already said most of the good. I mean, my list of good is, like you said, the smoking is prohibited in this compartment.
Yeah.
That's like classic, absolutely classic. Watson's looks throughout, I thought were great. The interactions between Sherlock and Mycroft, we didn't really talk much about Mycroft. I mean,
That's true.
We kind of take him for granted. He's just so great.
We do take him for granted because he's so great, but he's great.
Yeah.
That scene at the window is just so classic.
Yeah.
And funny because I watched it twice. I was reading along on the second time. It just goes by so fast, and I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and as animated and as basically perfect as he is, I mean, just if you read the description of Mycroft in the story, it's basically Charles Gray.
Yeah, just with a different head.
Yeah, well, yeah. Same eyes, though. But to me, the thing that makes it work so well is Jeremy's little, like, when they arrive back at Baker Street and he's beating them there and he's like, "Come in, sir." And Jeremy Brett just looks at him like, "What? Like, what are you doing here?"
Yeah.
And it's just like that little grin, that little
surprise.
Yeah, and that little bit of fun between them. And it happened, when Mycroft falls asleep and he slaps his hands together and he's like, "Mycroft!" But if I had to pick the best thing about this episode, maybe it's sacrilege because Mycroft is great and it's his first appearance. I think it's Mr. Kemp. I think he's really, really, really good.
He is. And I think I agree with you. But I do. Mycroft is great, but he's like always great. Yeah. And this is maybe one of the greatest Mycroft moments, but you have to give it to Kemp, I think, on this one.
Yeah.
There's just so many little things that he does that are memorable. Like when he goes, "Please, Mr. Malas," and he shoves him, and like the way he'll like take his little finger and brush things off his collar when he's walking by.
Yeah, I really appreciate those little moments because lots of actors try to do those little touchy-feely things, and they just come off like
they overdo it,
trying to be an actor.
Yeah,
and it's just so perfectly well done by him in this instance.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it too. When he hits Cratides with the cane, and he goes down, and he just poses there for a minute, like, "I'm gonna hit you again."
Yeah, that was a good moment. Yeah, I mean, we're not alone either because I believe it's in Granada's Greatest Detective, Keith Frankel. I believe it's that book. He actually agrees. He extols the virtues of George Costigan as well, and also Michael Cox in his book. So I think everybody was quite pleased.
Yeah,
calling him one of the best villains.
One of the best villains.
Yeah.
Definitely the best villain in tartan pants.
Yeah.
Tartan slacks. Sorry, British people.
Hopefully the only one. Well, what about the bad? It's hard to pick out too much bad. I mean, Sophia Cratides, I just kind of feel like she's kind of a meh to me. I don't dislike her. I just feel like she's a little too blasé. Maybe it was all intentional, but nothing against her. I just I didn't love her in this. Mycroft's clumsy grab
Yeah.
I feel like, I watched that a bunch of times. I watched this episode, I don't know, 3 or 4 times in preparation, and I made that note, and it was only on, I think, the 4th viewing where I noticed that the other passengers in the train car acted as though they went over a bump or something.
Yeah. He just really overdid it.
He overdid it, and he overshadowed all of them, but also, all they had to do was shake the camera a little bit.
Yeah.
And it would have been fine.
Sure.
It would have been realistic, but it kind of was clumsy.
Okay, speaking of clumsy,
Yeah.
there's a pretty bad, I guess you'd call it a pratfall or prat-roll behind the carriage when Maylass is thrown out.
Yeah, I watched that quite a few times too, trying to just figure out what's happening.
It's hard to say it's bad. It just that it is bad.
Yeah.
It's just
he eases himself down.
No. Well, what it is, it's a film trick, which I'm sure you know, but like a good roll, for an example, is Lord Denethor from Lord of the Rings when he carries Pippin out when they're burning Faramir.
Right.
He chucks a little actor, and then he rolls off camera, and then Pippin rolls up in front of the camera. So it's a little swap, little stunt trick.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they were doing here, and they tried to block his body because he was just on the ground
with the carriage.
rolling.
Yeah.
And it just
Yeah. It's one of those situations where if you're going to do a stunt, you got to have a different guy. And they didn't want a different guy. They wanted it to be careful. And,
right.
I think that's why. So
I just remember seeing that the first couple of times maybe. And I remember thinking, what's happening here? Was he on that carriage or did he get run over by it?
Yeah. It's just so unnatural the way he rolls.
Because it's so slow.
Yeah.
It's just so slow. Yeah.
Yeah.
But and something that wasn't clear in the episode was that they dumped him like miles from his house.
Yeah.
So he couldn't find his way back.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of awkward stunts, in my bad list, I put the train death of Latimer. I know we already talked about it, but it's a bit on the cheesy side.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. I mean, most of this show doesn't feel dated or doesn't feel cheap, but that train, being lit with green and red lights and him hanging off the side when it's clearly going about, 4 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is what it is. It's fine. It doesn't ruin the story. It doesn't take away too much from the episode, but if we're nitpicking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, budgets and TV schedules and things like that. I mean, it's pretty good for going quick.
Yeah.
One more thing about Kemp. He basically had Alan Rickman's delivery when he says, "That will do, Mr. Melas." It just reminded me of Snape.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that's the bad, which there isn't much, but how about the best Jeremy Brett moments?
I think like the whole thing is the best Jeremy Brett moment, but things just like little looks that he does in this episode, like when they said like they're starving him, and he's like, "Starving," just looks very worried.
Same moment like with the sticking plaster when he's like doing it, his hand over his face.
Yeah, sticking.
Yeah.
And when he goes, "They will know you betrayed them," and he just looks worried at Mr. Melas. Just those kind of things.
There's an interesting thing that occurs in this episode at least 3 times, and it probably happens a lot in the series, but as the scene ends, they just let the camera linger on Jeremy Brett for quite a while. Like when when he gets his gun out of the drawer.
Yeah.
And then he just kind of looks up and he waits for them to say cut.
Yeah.
And that happens numerous times in this one.
This episode and the last episode reminded me a lot of this interview I watched with Sir Ian McKellen when he was younger, and they were talking about stage acting. And they said, I learned very, very early on what to do with your hands if you're not sure what to do with your hands, which is nothing.
Right.
But Jeremy always finds something to do with his hands, like the way he will pose, and when Melas starts to tell him his story and he puts his fingers on his forehead. You know? And then when he's referencing the Bradshaw with his hand like upside down as he's reading the lines.
Yeah.
And then how deliberately he drops his cigarette on the train to put it out. He brings it up to his face and then drops it.
Yeah. I feel like probably we could blame people like Jeremy Brett for all the bad actors in the world who try to do those things and can't pull them off, because Jeremy Brett can pull them off.
Right.
And
which is kind of what McKellen was saying.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it also doesn't hurt that Sherlock Holmes is Sherlock Holmes.
He's known for it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I feel like this is going to be a hard one, but Persian slippers. Do you have a vote? I feel like it is top tier. It really is. And I mean, given that Kemp is in it and Mycroft is in it and Mr. Malas is great and everything, I mean, there are a few things that drag it down from the very top.
I think I would almost want to give it a 10, almost.
Really?
But I think just those couple of weird little things that we talked about, and just the fact that it's just kind of an odd story generally. But I do love it. I mean, and how many times I've watched it. I think I had 10 going onto the train, and then Mycroft bumped into me.
Yeah.
So probably about like 9.8.
Well, I think I'm going to go a little lower than that. And again, I'm struggling to remember what I voted on all of them. But I think I'm going to put it at a 9.4.
Very discerning.
Yeah. And we're going to get a list going so that we can keep track of what we voted before.
Yeah, well, that will be interesting to find.
And we reserve the right to change our votes.
At any time.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, what do we learn from this episode? More than anything, what I learned is that signatures, no matter how sloppy, are the most important factor in the transfer of vast fortunes.
Mm-hmm.
Because...
Or how forced.
Yeah. I don't... when you watch him sign that piece of paper, it's like, you waited all that time and starved him for that?
Yeah.
Pretty sure you could have just managed that yourself.
Well, and that also reminds me of Lord of the Rings again.
Yeah.
When they have the king sign and it's just like this streak of ink.
Yeah.
So he did it.
Yes, indeed. All right, well, as mentioned in our last episode, we have received a wonderful influx of all kinds of emails and messages since the Stephen Fry interview went out. And we're going to try to get to all of them. Perhaps not all today, but here's the first batch. We got an email from Sean who writes, I'm nearly new to the Sherlock Holmes stories. When I was a child, I watched the Hercule Poirot TV programs. What interested me was the times they were set in, the great sets, locations, and costumes. I'm currently watching the Granada episodes from YouTube and have watched most of them already. I got hooked straight away. My favorite episodes are The Sign of Four, The Three Gables, A Scandal in Bohemia, and The Master Blackmailer. What shocked me the most about all the episodes was Sherlock's acting out of character in The Master Blackmailer, his romancing of Agatha the housemaid to crack the case. Sherlock finds giving or receiving any romantic affection or feelings abhorrent to him. Even though I know he was faking it, it shocked me. So I recently bought the Audible canon, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the original story. Keep up the good podcasts. Thanks, Sean. I mean, we're skipping really ahead if we start talking about the Master Blackmailer, but
yeah, but it is shocking.
Yeah,
I mean, it's shocking how cruel he is, but
yeah,
but I think that shouldn't be that surprising.
Right, that part isn't surprising. One of the Sherlock Holmes gazettes has a cover on it, and it's like Sherlock Holmes in love, and it shows a picture of him and the woman. It's kind of funny, but yeah, I guess when you think about it in that way, which is he's using her, he breaks her heart, he really doesn't care.
Yeah,
that is kind of in line with Sherlock Holmes. But if I recall the episode correctly, there is a little bit of remorse in Jeremy Brett, I think, in the episode.
A little bit, but I mean, it's pretty brutal.
Yeah,
it's pretty brutal to the girl.
Yeah,
I mean, I think in the Cumberbatch series, they do the same thing where he's using her to get into the building.
Yeah,
but then she was like, "Well, I was also using you," so they kind of even it out a bit more.
Yeah. So interesting observation. It'll be a while before we get to that one, but it's always interesting to hear the episodes that people find to be their favorites.
Yeah, we'll keep watching.
Yeah. Justa writes, Gus and Luke, some Sherlockians have all the fun. Wonderful bits on Brett and Granada from you and Mr. Stephen Fry. Really enjoyable listen. Will your next interview be David Burke? Gentlemen, thank you and keep up the fine podcasting. Well, I wish we could answer that question. I
wish we could answer that question with a yes.
Yeah. I still have hope that maybe somebody out there will know David Burke and put in a nice word for us. But we've had no luck in getting connected with him via his agents or other people that we thought might help us out in that regard. But so far, nothing.
Maybe they're just watching from afar and waiting for the right time.
Yeah, fingers crossed, as always.
Come on, David.
Denny from Liverpool writes, I've often wondered when I think of Brett's performance all those years ago about all the instances of reflections in the show. Is it my imagination, or is absolutely every opportunity possible to use a reflection, especially of people, never missed? Were the mirror's reflections more likely to appear if certain directors or directors of photography were working on it? Is it fair to say that they're a hallmark or a calling card of a particular person? And if so, did they go on to use them later in other projects? I'll pause there for a second. I mean, I wish I could answer that question, but it actually comes up again in another email I'm going to read momentarily. And there definitely was at least one director that was very fond of the reflections. But I really think it was not just one person. It was a lot of directors we've seen already.
Yeah, I guess I should be keeping better track, but I tend to think it's the DP, director of photography.
Yeah.
Because, well, I mean, obviously because they're usually operating the camera or they're in charge of the camera. But there was a story I heard once about a TV show. They were filming in the same sets over and over and over again, so they had to start thinking of how to get creative and how to make them feel differently. And so things like that, shooting reflections, shooting through windows, and a lot of times just putting stuff in the frame just to add visual interest, just breaks things up. I actually just happened to watch The Mazarin Stone, and there is a lot of stuff crammed in the frame.
Yeah.
Just pieces of crystal and things so that they reflect. People's faces are kind of covering each other a little bit in the scene.
I think you're right. I mean, I think the director of photography, I'm not entirely sure if it's the same person throughout this entire series, but my guess is that when you've done this a lot you're using Baker Street over and over again, you look for ways to make it interesting and different.
But if you like that kind of thing, you should definitely watch The Mazarin Stone.
Yeah.
Because a lot of effort went in to doing it well. You can tell in that episode because it seems like they would just lay a piece of glass out in front of any scene, but they would have to light what's going on behind it differently than what's going on in front of it so that it would reflect and so you could see through the reflection. So there's a lot of effort that goes into that kind of stuff.
And I don't know, I'm not getting the sense that Denny is actually a fan of the reflections, but maybe he is. I don't know. There is one interesting shot through glass in this episode. Actually, there's quite a few in Greek Interpreter when they show the kids across the street on Baker Street. That's through the glass. But there's a moment when Mr. Melas gets into Kemp's carriage and they show some, I guess, ladies of the evening laughing in the glass across the street. It's very reminiscent of the Twilight Zone. There's an episode called Perchance to Dream that takes place in like a theme park, funhouse, circus, county fair type place, and the laughter, it's almost the exact same laughter in this episode. It really brought me back to that episode, Perchance to Dream.
But I think that's kind of different. I think like filming through a window gives you like a sense of place, like you're in it, but shooting through a piece of glass that's reflecting what's behind the camera.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's a different kind of.
Yeah, but they didn't have to do it at all. You know what I mean? So it was in this episode. So I thought it was well done. I thought it was good. Denny goes on to ask, by the way, whatever happened to Jeremy Brett's BAFTA? I listened to your show with Stephen Fry and I found that I could not sign up as the petition had closed and the link there leads to some form of Japanese supplier. Well, we've actually had quite a few inquiries about the status of the BAFTA for Jeremy, and not a lot we can say. We've been in contact with the folks who organized the original campaign, and we're still trying to figure out a possible plan of attack. But we'll get back to you when we have more info. Nothing really yet, but do stay tuned. I think the
BAFTA seems like it may be tricky, but there's other awards if we just want to get him some recognition, which I think is valuable.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we could look at Screen Actors Guild. We could look at
the Emmys,
Oscars and Emmys.
Things over in the States, which may not be as impactful as having a British award, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think he deserves the British award, to be honest, but...
Well, maybe we get him the American one. I mean, make the British feel bad.
Yeah. I don't know. As, we're coming up on the 25th anniversary of his passing next year, but the BAFTAs are in February, so we've kind of been told that that's going to be nearly impossible to make it happen this year. But at the rate we put out these episodes, when the 30th anniversary rolls around, maybe that'll be the time. But
if anybody from the BAFTAs is listening, get in touch and let us know.
We're not picky about the year it happens, so we'll continue to plug away at that, and we'll let you know as soon as we have more info.
Short answer: we will continue to work on it and let you know.
Yeah. Finally, Denny says, Also, I remember the local newspaper here, the Liverpool Echo, reporting that while filming in Liverpool, we used to love looking out during broadcast for places we recognized in our everyday lives, it claimed that a diary had been stolen from Jeremy Brett whilst filming on location here. I'll be very embarrassed for my city if this was true, but if it was it of any great value to him, or do you know if it was his 75-page notebook about Sherlock Holmes that he'd made for himself that Wikipedia mentions? Does the notebook still exist? I'd love to see a copy. Looking forward to hearing from you, Denny. Honestly, I know nothing about that diary. I don't know if it was ever found. I don't know if it is the same one. I haven't read anything about that in any of the books up to this point, so if I do encounter that, I will definitely let you know.
Yeah, well, I guess, again, if somebody's listening and they know something about it, get in touch.
Yeah, if anybody out there has the skinny, let us know.
Yeah, I know, a lot of bands have their instruments stolen and things like that. Like Paul McCartney's bass, I think, was stolen. But like Radiohead's gear was stolen in the 90s, and they actually just got it back.
Really?
Yeah, because they keep posting a thing saying no questions asked. Well, and so Johnny's got his Telecaster back with the Honda logo on it. So
nice.
So if it's out there, I'm sure, the Brett family or the Huggins family would love to get that back.
Yes, and for anyone listening who may be in possession of the diary, we would also love to get it back. So if you want to send it to us, just drop us an email, no questions asked.
And we'll delete your name.
Yes. Joe writes in to say, hello, I cannot tell you what this podcast means to me. I absolutely adore Jeremy and the series, rewatching them constantly and certain episodes only at specific times of the year. I obviously battle the melancholy and wistfulness of this endeavor, which I'm sure you share. But this and Jeremy transcends time, and to find your podcast lets me know I'm not alone in this obsessive journey. I'll just pause right there and say, absolutely. I mean, the melancholy and wistfulness aspect is something fans of this show have to get used to. But it's, I think, in a strange way, it's part of the show's charm, and something that keeps it open to continued and renewed examination and looking at it through different lenses.
Yeah, and it makes you appreciate, what we did get from it,
Yeah, exactly. He goes on to say, I've noticed a funny incident/mistake in the intro to the series, albeit subtle, but it seems I'm in good company with you fellows with the notion that no detail is too small. I noticed this detail because I've done a great deal of extra work in Hollywood. The assistant director always yells background action before he yells action. That's to get the extras moving from a stationary position. Well, see the old man walking from right to left in the intro? He starts moving when the music begins. Anyway, just a little something. I've kind of almost been saving this for a special episode because I feel like we could talk about this for an hour. But to me, you're totally right. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, which I'm sure most fans have seen it. But when you get into later episodes, and I can't think of one off the top of my head, I want to say Thor Bridge, but there are episodes where the pre-roll of the credits is longer than others. And there are some where it just sits there for like 5 seconds before the music starts. Yeah. And the extras are all just standing and waiting for action.
I actually, almost every time I start an episode, I say action when that guy goes.
Yeah. Yeah, you can time it because you know when it's about to come.
Or maybe he was just really deep in thought for a second.
Yeah.
And he's just like, oh, gotta go.
Yeah. I can only imagine like Michael Cox and June Wyndham Davies and even Jeremy Brett, if they, watch these shows back, feeling the pain every time they had to watch that guy not go when the show starts.
Well, but again, it was probably the kind of thing where they got that shot just right and the crane moved just right. And they were like, well, we need an extra second and a half.
Right.
And you just do what you got to do.
And in reality, I mean, probably for the first, how many years I watched this show, your eye goes right to the 221B sign.
Yeah.
So you almost always have the moment where you don't notice it.
There's a lot to look at in that shot.
Yeah, in the frame. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
But good eye.
Yeah. Joe says, one more thing. How do we acquire footage of the play The Secret of Sherlock Holmes? It's become a holy grail of sorts. Thank you, Gus and Luke. Best, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
We put out the feelers in hopes that if any such recording exists, that somebody might reach out to us. And if anyone out there does have it, on video in any capacity or film, I mean, we'd be more than happy to undertake the endeavor of restoring that and getting it out there to the world. But
I had a thought.
Yeah.
We had occasion to hear some behind-the-scenes stories about how shows are documented on the West End.
Yeah.
And on occasion, I don't know what society this is or which arm of who does this, but on occasion, someone will bring a camera just to document a play. Not every single play, but a lot of plays are documented and put into register. So it's possible it's sitting on a VHS tape somewhere.
Yeah. Anything's possible. I mean, I had, until I found out that Jeremy Paul had passed on, I was thinking of trying to reach out to him or maybe someone at his estate. And as it turns out, I've found a way to reach out to his estate, but haven't done it yet. We'll see. If I feel like if anybody would have a copy, it'd be somebody there.
Yeah.
Having written the screenplay, but I don't know. I feel like we'll be really lucky if that surfaces, because frankly, and again, hopefully we'll get into this at some later date and really talk about that play in depth, but it was kind of, I don't want to say it was thrown together at the last minute, but they were initially going to do something very different. It was just going to be Jeremy Brett reading the stories aloud or parts of the stories, and it kind of morphed into Jeremy Paul saying, well, let me write something. And it was just a two-hander, two guys on stage, very small play, and unless the house recorded it or Jeremy Paul or Michael Cox or somebody had the forethought to say, let's document that, you'd be amazed how often that doesn't happen and things just get lost forever. I mean, I mentioned it on previous episode, us talking to Trevor Nunn, and so many of his plays have just never been recorded, and it's just sad. I told him, if you ever want anyone to record your plays, just call us. We'll come do it. And I wish we could have been there for that one, because we certainly would have bootlegged it. We have another note here from Robert Moon in Nottingham. He says, "Gentlemen, there have been many great Holmes-Watson-Mycroft combinations. Jeremy Brett, and especially Edward Hardwicke, who I think galvanized the series, creating a more adept Watson, a more realistic Watson, is impossible to beat. I love everything about the Granada series, the selection of incredible actors who contributed, but it is with the inclusion of Charles Gray as Mycroft when it takes another leap forward. And of course, Eric Porter as Moriarty. He is villainous and capable, so erudite and visceral. The character of Moriarty, appearing in just 2 stories, fascinated me, and I recently wrote a novel called Professor Moriarty and the Portland Vase. I decided to base it several decades earlier than his run-in with Holmes, as a man forging a career in crime in London, creating the vast spider's web institution that would come to irk Holmes. All I need now is an agent or a publisher. Anyway, I cannot wait to listen in detail to your podcasts, and I'll keep in contact as I submerge myself. Regards, Robert." Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I mean, if anybody out there is a publisher or agent looking for that kind of, Professor Moriarty, it sounds very interesting to me, frankly. I mean, Conan Doyle never wrote it.
Right.
The backstory of Moriarty building his web
network. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if anyone else ever has tackled that either. It sounds really cool to me. So if anyone out there wants to reach out to us, I'm happy to put you in contact with Robert, and best of luck to Robert with the book.
Yeah.
We have another message here from another Robert, Dr. Robert McCall. He writes in to say, "Dear Gus and Luke, many, many thanks and congratulations on your Sherlock podcast. It is high time Brett's most courageous, intense, and exacting achievement was given its due, not only with a posthumous BAFTA, but with a podcast or society in his name. I recall very well as a boy, when the Granada series first hit our British screens, being overwhelmed by Brett's performance, which, like the proverbial fine wine, has only grown on me over time. I still watch the series every year, and largely because of Brett, find nothing comparable to it. I look forward to your forthcoming reflections and interviews. Best wishes and best of luck, Dr. Robert." Thanks, Robert. And like we said, proverbial fine wine, that's the best way you could say it.
We should come up with a name for Jeremy Brett fans. Like Brettiacs?
I feel like there probably is one out there. We should know it, to be honest.
Brettheads?
Brett Holmesians?
We'll think of one by the end of the show.
Yeah. John writes in to say, "Hello, Gus and Luke. Thank you both very much for producing this podcast. I love listening to it and love knowing there are so many others out there who appreciate Jeremy Brett as Holmes. I was first introduced to the Granada series when I was in my early teens in the mid-'80s when they ran it on PBS. I distinctly remember the Greek interpreter for the scene when Melas and Cratides are suffocating to death, sulfur in the show, charcoal in the book. It struck me as being very disturbing. Even watching as an adult, it's an unpleasant scene." I'll pause there. Yeah, this is one of those shows, I really wonder what it's like for newcomers, if they find it as disturbing and kind of spooky as I did and still do, I mean, I know how it works, when you see something as a child, it affects you forever. But given the current landscape of, horror and other things that are in the mainstream culture, I wonder if this show comes across in any way creepy, spooky, disturbing to people, or if it's just trite now,
Well, that's a good point. I wonder because, audiences are now subjected to crazy amounts of violence and things like that.
Yeah.
But usually it's, movie violence and it's over the top. But like when you just see like a dead body on the ground,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of cutting around it, it's a different kind of visceral experience. But to your point about things staying with you from when you were a child, I was very scared of the movie House.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched that maybe a week ago.
Yeah.
And it was awful.
Yeah. Well, some things don't age well.
Some things don't age well and are not scary.
Yeah. But I mean, the things that were disturbing to me in the Sherlock series were things like, Sutton.
Yeah.
And like even just me saying it out loud right now gives me like the chills.
Yeah.
Because it was so creepy. But I agree with you. Like Hollywood violence and movies and things, even TV these days, it's so fast paced that's what I wonder. I wonder if someone sees this for the first time and they're in this slower paced environment.
Right.
If it's still as effective.
I think that adds to the effectiveness. I mean, I think when you think of good horror movies,
Yeah.
even modern horror movies, it's always a slow camera move down a hallway and it's the unknown, like what's going to happen and the suspense, rather than just a bunch of action and blood flying everywhere.
Yeah.
That's not the scary part, it's the suspense.
Right.
And that scene with Sutton, it's a weird one. Like it actually kind of reminds me of the end of 2001.
Yeah.
When he keeps seeing himself over and over.
Yeah.
That's odd.
Yeah.
Speaking of 2001, that's maybe one of the scariest scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. The music does it.
Yeah.
Well, John goes on to say, "I absolutely love Charles Gray as Mycroft. He and Brett work very well together. As you will undoubtedly mention, this was not Gray's first time playing Sherlock's brother. He portrayed Mycroft in the 1976 movie The 7% Solution, starring Nicol Williamson as Sherlock Holmes, Robert Duvall as Dr. Watson. The film also stars Vanessa Redgrave, whose daughter Natasha Richardson plays Violet Hunter in The Copper Beeches, another link to the Granada series."
Yeah.
I did mention that, but I actually forgot to mention the Natasha Richardson connection, so yeah, thank you. John continues, "George Castigan is very memorable as the Peter Lorre-esque Wilson Kemp, a great lowlife. A very well done episode, in my opinion."
He was also great in Kids in the Hall.
Yes. He says, "Keep up the good work. I always enjoy listening." Thanks, John. Okay, next email. "Hello, Luke and Gus from a wintry Derbyshire.
Finally, I get one first.
Just wanted to drop you an email saying a massive thank you for making the podcast. The series has always been extremely special to me, and I must confess to watching it avidly, knowing almost every line and gesture in every episode. I'm sure this sounds familiar." Oh, yes. Yeah, I sat down with my wife recently to watch The Shaw's Come Old Place, and she went up to get something, and I was like, "Do you want me to pause it?" And she's like, "No, we just saw this one 3 weeks ago."
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I was like, "Did we? I don't remember." But yeah, that's our lot. So back to Dave's email. He says, "I thought I would send you some limericks about your fabulous endeavors." And this is what he wrote. "There are two lovely chaps, Luke and Gus. It's a pleasure to hear them discuss the joy that they get out of Jeremy Brett. More than that, they pass their joy to us." And that's just the first one. Here's another one.
And my name comes first again.
Yeah. He says, "There was a fine fellow called Brett, whom we owe an unpayable debt, for with Hardwick and Burke he put lots of hard work into being the greatest Holmes yet." Hope you enjoy them.
That's a good one.
That is a really good one. He actually,
That also gives me an idea.
Yeah.
Because Brett and Debt.
Yeah.
Debtors. We could be called Bretters.
Bretters.
We'll see if it sticks.
See if it sticks. He goes on to say, as a side note, I've written some books based on Sam Wiggins, one of the Baker Street irregulars, and taken him into his own stories and adventures outside the Holmes world, but with the occasional reference thrown in for aficionados like yourselves, The Adventure of the Deverell Diamonds and The Adventure of the Queen Anne's Revenge, which, if you ever find time, I think you'll enjoy. They feature the first instance, I think, of a teenage LGBTQ detective struggling to make their way through Victorian London, solving crimes, and coming to terms with the world around them. They are both available on Amazon.
Nice.
Anyway, shameless plug aside, thank you for all you're doing to bring attention to one of the greatest television series ever created, other than the latter Peter Hammond-directed episodes, which are more mirrors than plot and more form than content. Jeremy was truly an incredible actor, and it's wonderful to see his work being lauded in this way. Dave Culling, Derbyshire, England, and he's at daveculling.com. And I guess Peter Hammond, that is one of the reflection-heavy guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, we have been doing kind of sporadic book reviews, which we could start doing more of, and putting them on Patreon, things like that. So, I mean, if obviously people are sending in information on books, we could start doing more regular book reviews if that's helpful. Or...
Yeah, I mean, be happy to do it if time permits.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of reading and research to do these episodes.
Yeah.
So then putting the book reviews in, they might be more spaced out.
Yeah, and we do have other projects
in
life other than the Sherlock Holmes podcast.
At the moment.
We'll see what happens. Okay, well, I want to read one last email before we wrap this one up. This one's a bit longer, but it's from a listener named Christopher Jones, who was kind enough to share some very interesting recollections with us. He writes, "Hello, Gus and Luke. I caught your interview with Stephen Fry today just by chance. It prompted me to watch an array of interviews with Jeremy Brett and Edward Hardwicke, some of which I had seen before, and took me back 30 years to when I met both of them. I met them several times due to my work with the Sherlock Holmes memorabilia shop in Baker Street, and I have a charming letter from Edward thanking me for a copy of his portrait. And if anybody wants to see that portrait, you can go to Christopher's website, which is https://sites.google.com/view/cbjones-writer/home. Christopher continues, "It was interesting what Stephen Fry and many of the guest actors have said about Jeremy's obsession with his character. As I was leaving his dressing room at the theater before a performance of The Secret of Sherlock Holmes, he caught my arm and showed me the silver pocket watch with the sovereign as its fob that he wore as part of the costume. 'She gave me this, you know, Christopher,' he said. 'I wear it on my watch chain in memory of the occasion.' Jeremy also told me that he was a huge Basil Rathbone fan, and when he was a young actor in Rep, he used to scrape back his hair and imagine himself as Holmes. When he signed my copy of the short stories, he noted that, like me, he was left-handed. He told me that every time Holmes was required to write, he had to hold the pen right-handed and pretend. For close-up shots, a stunt hand double, his words, would be used. Edward was completely the opposite. He was a very good actor and my favorite Watson. I met him for the last time in a wine bar in Hampstead, and I suggested he write his memoirs of life in Hollywood during its golden years. He was very modest and didn't think anyone would read it. He also told me that Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce were good friends of his father, but although they were frequent visitors to his house, he was too young to appreciate who they actually were. He offered to sign my copy of his father's autobiography, but sadly died before our next meeting. Strangely enough, I was in Harrods a few years later and came face to face with the great Charles Gray. He was so frightening looking that I just froze to the spot as he excused himself and went on his way. Another opportunity lost. Damn it.
Well,
yeah.
I bet he would be pretty frightening.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
As a really weird side note,
yeah,
I saw Peter Cushing in a music video. It's the weirdest thing ever because he just walks through in profile. But it was a music video for a song that was featured in a movie that he was in. And the only reason I came across it is because John Deacon, Queen's bass player, played bass on this song.
What's the band? What's the song? What's the movie?
I don't know any of that.
Interesting.
I could look it up.
Well, that's all right. I'm sure there's a mystery if anybody wants to go
There's a
solve it.
mystery if you want to solve it.
Okay, well, Christopher goes on to say, other memories of meeting Jeremy were his appreciation of the guest actors they had over the years, particularly, as he said, the wonderful Peter Vaughan in the Boscombe Valley Mystery, and his friends John Thaw in The Sign of Four, Robert Hardy, the master blackmailer, and, of course, Joss Ackland in Copper Beaches, and how impressed he was by the Baker Street set. The exterior was so authentic that, and I quote, there were even steaming piles of horse shit from the hansom cabs on the cobbles. We had a long chat at the now-closed memorabilia shop, where upstairs was a recreation of the living room at 221B using the furniture and curtains from Granada TV. He noted that the only thing wrong with the Granada set was that the 221B exterior was built on the wrong side of the street before they realized that the Salford Gasworks would have to be hidden behind the Regent's Park trees at the far end. Just before the first airing of the final series, there was a screening of The Adventures of the Three Gables at the National Film Theatre on London's South Bank. The entire cast, the writer, producer, and director were there, but when we arrived, we were all disappointed to learn that Jeremy Brett was too ill to attend. I did manage to speak to Edward and pass on my best wishes. Last year, I published my first novel and have tried to include a few Holmesian quotes and references. It's called The Breath of the Zephyr. It's a historical, metaphysical murder mystery with a touch of the supernatural. I've self-published it in paperback and digital formats on Amazon. I'll keep looking out for your podcasts. Meanwhile, avoid the moor at night when the powers of evil are exalted. Regards, Christopher Jones. Well, that was a really great email, Christopher. Thank you for writing in and sharing those memories with us. I mean, geez, I if I could invent a time machine, I would probably waste it on traveling to Harrods on that day and meeting those people.
Yeah.
But it's great to know that that you had such great experiences and got to meet everybody. If you think of any other fun reflections, feel free to send them in and we'll share them with the audience.
As to your quote, I think the only time we were on a moor was at night. A few years ago, we were driving and we were going to Cambridge and we saw the Wimpole estate from the road and just thought we had to go check it out on the way back.
Yeah.
It ended up being at nighttime with the fog rolling in and then just wild deer everywhere.
Yeah, there's more than just deer.
Yeah. But we wound up at a place called the Hardwick Arms, of all places.
Yeah, right next to that. It's another one of the National Trust properties.
Yeah.
And I don't think that house was ever used in the series. I don't
think so, but it looked like it,
it very well could have been.
There's
yeah.
a neat hedge maze and
yeah.
But we ended up sitting in the bar, talking about Scotch with a Scotsman.
Yeah.
And then they were out of food, so they ordered us a pizza.
Yeah, if anybody out there has ever seen An American Werewolf in London, the pub scene at the beginning of that movie, that was almost the exact situation that we found ourselves in. A lot of locals that didn't like us and didn't want us around, but as soon as we started buying rounds and ordering pizza, everybody loosened up, and it was a fun time.
Well, and we had a good time. We were talking about Scotch, and I had listed a few Scotches that I like, and the Scot was impressed. And then I said, you know what I also like? His teacher's Scotch. And he's like, get out of here with your teacher's Scotch.
Well, we had also just come back from an afternoon with Stephen Hawking that day. And when we told everybody that, everybody suddenly thought we were pretty neat. So it was an adventure. That was a different adventure. Maybe we'll talk about that one someday. Well, I think that's probably a good place to pause the email inbox. We've still got a ton to get to, but we will. All good things in time.
Yeah, that seemed like a pretty long one. I feel like I could go home and sprinkle some devil's foot powder over a lamp and get to sleep early.
Yeah. All right. All right, well, that is just about all the time we have for this episode. But, as usual, I wanted to take just a moment to thank all of our new listeners and friends, with a special thanks to those who are supporting us over on Patreon. Sean, Paul, John, Alexis, Casey, Daniel, Doug, Philip, Jane, Vincent, Karen, Magical Boy, Bo, Mari, Flick, Elizabeth, Abby, Jan, Joy, Mark, and Jeremy Brett Lover. You guys are really helping keep this show afloat, so thank you again. and as of this recording, we've just reached our first goal of 20 patrons. So we're going to start rolling out some additional content there on a more regular basis. So if you'd like to be a part of that, please visit us at patreon.com/Sherlock Podcast. Of course, look for updates and other supplemental material to the podcast on our Twitter page at twitter.com/SherlockPod. And if you'd like to share your thoughts about any of the topics we've covered, please drop us a line at contact@SherlockPodcast.com. And remember to like and subscribe, perhaps even write a little review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the great ones just keep coming, and next time is no exception. Join us then for the Norwood Builder. Until next time.